Welcome to another Gamma Partner Artist feature. Today we speak with Olly. Olly has had a very decorated career, designing posters for huge movies such as Star Wars and Moana, designing video game covers such as Call of Duty, now principal artist at Discord, and also part of the Gamma Partner program. We learn all about his history as an artist, how he got there, studying art, tough lessons, as well as how he enjoys creating for himself and also mentoring young artists due to inspirations he had when he was younger. I hope you enjoy the conversation. So it's a pleasure to have Olly with us today. Olly is one of the Gamma Partner artists, somebody I was introduced to and very thankfully introduced to by Tyler Faust, who's another Gamma Partner artist. So shout out and thank you to Tyler for introducing us to Olly. Olly has an amazing background, which we're going to dive into today. He's released his first print called Baron von Bitcoin, which is also super unique, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But Olly, enough from me. I would love to hear from you. You know, go back as far as you want, talk about where you started, how you got into art, your journey, and then, you know, we can go from there. Introduce yourself.
Cool. Well, thank you. Yeah, I go by Olly online just because my real name's too hard to pronounce. So, but I'm pretty much doxed online. So, you know, it's not like a pseudonym. That's why I, you know, have the camera on and everything. So hopefully there's no stalkers out there though. But yeah, I've been an artist my whole life and just been lucky enough to kind of follow it as a passion ever since I was a kid. And so, you know, went to art school and went to an art center, College of Design, it's called, in California, which is it's a pretty big art school out there. And graduated and just been lucky enough to find work ever since. You know, I've been doing, I started doing like movie posters and video game covers and commercial art, and did a lot of that commercial art for kind of big IP for various studios and companies and stuff. And eventually I've wound my way to where I am now, which is at Discord, principal artist at Discord, working on the games that they have at Discord. And in my own time, I continue my own kind of line of work. And that's where Gamma comes in. And that's where kind of my online stuff is with releasing NFTs and different series. And that's kind of been my personal creative outlet, I guess you could say.
So you touched on quite a lot in terms of your, you know, professional history and becoming a creator. I'd love to know where it started. You mentioned that you know, were doing art as a kid, and then, you know, I, of course, would love to learn more about the video game cover design and movie poster design and who you've worked for and some of that. But yeah, go back as far as you like. When did you first realize, I suppose, that you were creatively interested?
Yeah, well, I've talked about this before, like how, you know, as a kid, you know, most kids draw, you know, pretty much all kids, you know, when they're really young, draw. They love to color and draw and stuff. But eventually that kind of gets, that kind of leaves them, you know, as they get older. I think as they get more self-conscious about what they're drawing and, you know, they're not sure if it's good or not, or so they stop. But luckily I just kind of kept drawing and kept creating. And when I was a kid, like 12 years old, I was doing like some pet portraits for people. And so I do like watercolor pet portraits and stuff. And then in high school, I just kept going with it, you know. And I guess I was lucky because I've always known that's what I was going to do in some form or fashion. I didn't know what kind of artist I was going to be or what I was going to be working on or what. I just knew that's what I was going to do. So for me, I was lucky that way. So I just kept pursuing it, you know, I kept pursuing it and bettering myself and putting the time and effort in, and eventually just kind of led one thing to another, you know.
And so you started with pet portraits. That's great. Were you interested in that? And then it's interesting, as you said, you know, some people then stop, like a lot of kids draw. What do you think kept you going? Did you have a supportive and nurturing environment in regards to that?
Yeah, I think so. You know, my mom and dad were pretty supportive, and my mom drew herself as well, you know, so we kind of shared that together, and they were very supportive. And, you know, I had kind of natural talent or ability, so I was still like good for my age type thing. So I got a lot of positive feedback, which was helpful. And so that just kind of kept made it easier to keep going, you know. So
Yeah, and then you mentioned that you studied art and then sort of ended up doing some quite unique work. How was that period of your life? And then, let's get into that
yeah.
game design and movie poster design. I know that you've done some really interesting work.
Yeah, well, I moved down to California to go to a really big art school there called Art Center College of Design, and that's where I met kind of like my hero. I found out lived down there, and I don't know if you're familiar with him, but his name is Drew Struzan, and he is the famous movie poster artist of the '80s. So if you think back to Star Wars, Indiana Jones, the E.T. movie posters, Goonies, if you're familiar
Hmm.
with movies, all those movie posters he created. So he was the artist that did those, E.T., all these movie posters of the '80s and '90s. And so I kind of searched him out down there. He lived in Pasadena at the time, and he kind of took me under his wing and was mentoring me for a while. I'd go over to his week every studio and got to watch him paint. Like the first time I went over, he was painting the Harry Potter movie poster, the very first one, So I
Yeah.
got to sit in his studio and watch him paint and stuff, and he has a very particular style, but um, it's kind of fun because I got to do a lot of work after school in his style, because it was very sought after, So, um, yeah, so
What do
so
you?
that, yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, what do you think you learned from him? I didn't realize that must have been quite an inspiring time for you.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, he kind of, he's like a master illustrator, master artist, and to be able to get to sit there in his studio while he's working, watching him create these. He was working on the Star Wars Episode 2 poster as well, when I was there, and so it was just really cool to kind of sit at his feet and learn from him and see how he handled everything from the business side to the art side. And I helped him put together, he paid me to put together a book for him, like scanning in all his work and stuff. So I got to collaborate with him on creating his book of work and stuff. So it was a great experience. And, I've always tried to kind of pay that forward, as I meet younger artists and stuff to kind of help them along, give them advice and feedback on their work and stuff. Um, and one of the things that I tried to do and that I appreciated that Drew did was he was brutally honest, and even like at Art Center, that school is famous for being honest with their feedback and their really tough instructors. Like if something wasn't great, they would tell you it was not great. um, your mom wants to hang everything on her fridge, but the artist feedback you get back, sometimes can hurt if you're if you're sensitive. But I learned to not be sensitive about art, and I realized that as artists, we kind of create something when we feel it's precious. It's this precious thing that I've created. But if you can kind of remove yourself from that, you can create better art because it doesn't become precious to you. You can kind of be more fearless in creating it. Um, so yeah, that was some good, important lessons that I learned there. And then when I graduated, I just started doing freelance work, freelance illustration work for um, just a lot of little companies until I finally found this one studio um, where I started working on bigger jobs. Like what my first big job was um, Call of Duty, and that was a brand new game at the time, and we were working on Medal of Honor 2, which is another series that I don't know if you've heard of Medal of Honor series, but
Hmm.
it's also a big video game series back at that time, especially. So we were working on those, kind of and I was taking up the Call of Duty stuff, and my art director was taking up the Medal of Honor stuff. So we kind of had these parallel paths going. Um, but that was a lot of fun because we didn't know it was going to be a huge game at the time, but it was a lot of fun to kind of create those covers and then watch that game just kind of blow up.
How was that experience? And then also, I'm curious, you mentioned before about learning to be quite fearless and accept criticism, which is super healthy. Do you think that has shaped you as you've gone on with your career?
Yeah, totally. Because in the commercial art field, when you're creating art for a studio like Disney or Lucas or Midway or sorry, Activision or whoever, you know, they're paying you to create, so you have to kind of find this balance between what creative comes out of you and what their requirements are and what they want to see. So it's kind of always a battle between what you think is good and what they want to see. And sometimes it results in really bad work being done.
Mm.
Like there's plenty of bad commercial art video games and movie posters that are just terrible, but if you're able to take that criticism and spin it into something good, that's when kind of magic happens and you're able to do some cool work.
Yeah, and speaking of those companies, it means you've worked with some really unique people and big organizations. Feel free to mention some of the films that you've designed posters for, and then also talk about that process, because it'll be quite different to when you're creating for yourself.
Yeah. So I've been able to do several films, like the DreamWorks Kung Fu Panda 2 and Moana, Lion King re-release, Jungle Book. Some of these ones that were kind of back in the early 2000s,
Yeah.
or the mid 2000s. But the film industry is terrible. I didn't do a whole lot of those because it was just such a pain to work for, because their expectations were astronomical.
Mhm.
You'd get a request come in Friday night for 50 comps, and they want them done for Monday morning. What does that mean?
Mm.
That means you work in the weekend.
Mhm.
So they paid well, but the expectations were crazy. But so it's trying to find that balance, I guess.
And then how do you feel when you see your artwork up for a film? For example, let's just pick Moana. I know you've done others, and it does become this global phenomenon, and little kids love it. My kids love it.
Hmm.
It must be a unique feeling.
Yeah, it's great. It's a lot. It was a lot of fun. I kind of miss that because I don't do much of the commercial work anymore. But yeah, that was what was really cool, is to see work that you've worked on and helped create, kind of spread out all over the world. So that was really, special. When I first started doing it, I think you or Tyler or somebody asked me this, did you like kind of go in and kind of go into the store and say, hey, I did that, and when I first started working, I kind of did that a couple of times, like, oh, hey, notice somebody picking up a piece that I did and go, oh, you know who did that? But
That's great.
yeah, it's just kind of fun, because in that kind of world, you can't sign your work. No one signs movie. Drew does. That guy was telling you about Drew Struzan, and he gets to like sign
Mm.
his work because that's just what he does. But for the most part, you don't get to sign, video game covers or movie stuff or whatever. It's you're all very anonymous.
Yeah, understood. And do you think part of or some of what you learned with Drew has come out when you do that sort of work?
Yeah, totally. Well, like literally, like because I do, people have approached me to do work in his style, so I've done like the Indiana Jones Monopoly game board. So I did the illustration in the center with this whole Indiana Jones montage, and it was all done in the style of Drew Struzan's, because he had been retired. He's retired now and stuff, but I felt it was kind of like, well, he was my mentor and he helped me out and he taught me a lot of stuff. So I feel like I'm allowed to do his work in his style.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure you get a pass for that. And
Yeah.
then on the flip side, you've released NFTs, and now you've released an ordinal print with us at Gamma as part of the Gamma Partner Program. So that will allow you to sort of express yourself in, completely different ways. How's that for you as a creator, where you have, I guess, full artistic control? And whilst you're talking about it, I'll pull up Baron von Bitcoin, and you can feel free to talk about that as well.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah. So when I started working at Discord, that's kind of when in 2020, I guess, that's kind of when I started to be introduced into the whole Web3 communities and the Web3 art world and stuff. So, because Discord is kind of like the hanging out place where communities, are able to reach their audience and stuff, and so provide information and all that kind of stuff. So when I started with NFTs, it was kind of like I was just kind of doing just funny, whimsical stuff that I enjoyed painting, and that's kind of where Baron von Bitcoin came out for Gamma when you guys approached me about joining the Gamma program, which I was really appreciative of. I thank you for that, and Tyler for making the connection. But so for Baron von Bitcoin, I kind of thought about doing a series called The Aristocrats, and this is the first one. I have the second one, which I'm about to release any day now. I mean, it's ready. I'm just trying to figure out when to release it. But so for this one, it's just kind of whimsical take on Bitcoin and kind of the hysteria that goes around it. The Aristocrats is kind of a line from, is a kind of a punchline of a joke that I don't know if you've looked it up yet, but
I still haven't.
okay, yeah, it's kind of it's just kind of a joke that comedians tell themselves. Basically, what the premise is. Oh, I don't want to get into it.
No, feel free. Feel free. The dirtiest joke in the world, supposedly. So if you're watching this and you want to look it up,
Yeah.
I do need to look it up. Like, I'm not trying not to. I just haven't.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I love it. And so, do you know what? It's a great segue. Tell me about inspiration. So obviously, when you're working and it's commission work for a company, you know exactly what you need to do. So, for example, this one was free. You know, like you said, pleasure to have you as part of the partner program. You know, thanks to Tyler, but of course, you know, it's so wonderful to be able to meet creators through creators as well. But you know, it's a blank canvas. There was no theme. No one told you do this or do that. You were able to sort of think and start from scratch. Where do you sort of seek inspiration from? Like, this is a unique place to sort of seek inspiration from in terms of, you know, the aristocrats. But yeah.
Yeah, well, I see all the craziness that goes on with Bitcoin and the crazy characters there are, just there's one every minute, all the media personalities that are online and the influencers and stuff and the scammers and grifters that are all, I had a lot of exposure with those at the very beginning, like probably most people do. I got taken in by a few of them. And that's kind of where the aristocrats comes out, because it's this whole cadre of seedy people that tries to put on a good front, and so that's what the aristocrats means. It's this seedy underworld, but they're the aristocrats. It's like this, it's the position of, and so that's where Baron von Bitcoin comes in, and so it's just kind of a fun take that I wanted to do.
No, totally. And yeah, like I said, I've collected it. I love it. Tell us, what is the creative process? How did you create that? And what and how do you like to create? Obviously, there are lots of different, artistic styles and genres.
Yeah, well, this is kind of a continuation, or I've been doing work in the NFT space for a couple of years, and I've just kind of created work that I found interesting, subject matter that I found interesting, like materials and processes and stuff, and I've kind of continued that on. That's why I do like a lot of gold work in my stuff. So yeah, my process is or the way I look for inspiration is kind of like the subject matter that I like to do, and kind of themes that I've been running throughout some of my work the past few years in the NFT space has been like gold, and then and drippy gold and different stuff, and how can I spin that into kind of clean designs. And so I use I started out as a traditional painter, so everything was done traditionally, but lately it's just because time and stuff, you don't have to wait for paint to dry, so I use Photoshop mainly to paint in, and a Wacom tablet. So that's kind of, those are my tools, I guess you would say. Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting point to touch on. How have you found, I guess, as technology and programs like Procreate, Illustrator, all of these things keep improving, how have you found, perhaps moving from the physical to the digital in terms of creating and painting? It's still painting. It's just a very different way to do it.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a whole big discussion there, because right now the technology and the tools and the software is so advanced and so crazy that it takes a lot of the skill or artistry out of art that used to be there. Like even just drawing a straight line is a difficult thing to do, but not in Photoshop, or not in digital programs. And that's why traditional artists like Tyler Faust, he does all his work hand drawn on paper, and so there's a very um, you know, there's no undo for that. You know, you can't just erase it and start over. You know, it's a very particular way of doing it. You have to have like line control, and you have to control your hand and stuff. And so, you know, I think the tools that we use, like the software, is great, but not when it replaces the artist's skill or ability to see. So I think a lot of the times 3D art and AI art kind of masks an artist's, I guess, weaknesses. Like if you don't know how to draw something or render it, you know, you can just put it in 3D and point a light on it digitally and it'll render it for you, you know. Um, so it's just kind of a balance, I guess, you know.
Yeah,
And
and I think it's an interesting discussion, and you've been creating for quite a while now, so you've seen it, I guess, change dramatically. And it is certainly something that people grapple with. Have you found a bit of a balance, or are you always kind of tossing and turning in your viewpoints around it?
well, I found, you know, for me, you know, I don't like look at every new tool that comes along, but when I review portfolios, you know, I always kind of look for a traditional section in their work. Like, where can I see something that I know wasn't influenced by 3D or AI or anything else because it was traditional? You know, it's actually painted or drawn on something. So you can't have AI or 3D do that for you. So I always try and find that in addition to the person's regular work, just to kind of see, get a whole picture of where they're at as an artist. You know, that's just personally what I do when I'm looking at portfolio and work and stuff. So, um,
That's great. Do you do that a bit? Do you, like, what advice? So you review art. What advice do you have? I think that's, again, the segues are writing themselves. Thanks, Ollie. How, like, what advice do you have for, upcoming artists, budding artists, regardless of the space?
yeah, my biggest advice is always is don't is learn the foundations. You know, because it's too easy to, especially now, to get swept up in the digital realm where it kind of does it for you. If I give you like a sphere to draw with a pencil on paper, it's very different than if you try to do a sphere in Photoshop. You know, like if you're on paper, you have to know that what a core shadow is or a half tones. You have to know what a reflected light is or atmospheric light, a cast shadow, a secondary cast shadow, you know, all these different stuff that makes up something to give it volume and form. If you don't know what those things are, if you don't know how to render them, and you're just dependent on the technology, then I think you're missing out on a lot because you can't tell when the technology does something wrong, or you know, you can't tell how to make it better, or what's, you know, you have to know the rules to break them, I guess is what I'm saying, you know. And you probably heard that people use that in different fields, but you got to know the rules first so that then you can break them. um,
Yeah, no, I totally. I used to be a primary school teacher, and it was a similar thing in regards to educating the kids. And a while ago, almost back at the start, you mentioned how, I guess, your background, you learned the artistic side, but you also learned the business side. How does that, I guess, maybe potentially influence the way you go about what you do?
well, it's different for me because, you know, I don't have to depend on the creative work I do outside, you know, for this genre for my income. You know, I do it because I want to do it, and I like, you know, I'm talking to you because I like what you guys are doing. I like the technology of it. I like the website you've built, and I like how the artists are all interacting with it. And that's kind of why I'm here. So the business side for me, you know, doesn't really come into as much as other artists who are depending on it for their living, you know. But I think it's, you know, it's just a really interesting time to see how all these new avenues are opening up for artists in business, you know. And um, you know, there's just so many more outlets for creativity and for artists to sell their work and to get known and recognized than ever before. So it's really cool.
So, Ollie, remiss of me not to bring it up yet. Tell me about what you're up to at Discord. Obviously, taking your design work, you know, onto Discord. You mentioned before it's kind of like the hub or the home of all these Web3 communities, and you do some pretty unique stuff there. Yeah, feel free to dive into it.
Yeah, well, it's a great, you know, that's what kind of gave me my introduction to crypto and stuff, was working for Discord. Um, And so we're continuing to create on Discord for Web3 and making it a more secure place for communities and people. And then for artists, I get to work on the game team within Discord. There's a video game team, and we're kind of creating these activities for Discord that you can play within the platform. So we want Discord to be a place where you can gather with all your friends online, and playing games is one of those ways you do that. So we're creating some Discord specific, in the app games that you can play in.
And that must take you back, given that, like you said, you've done video game design and been involved with things such as Call of Duty. Have you taken that experience into what's up at Discord?
Yeah, there's, in fact, a lot of the people that I work with, we're a pretty small development team at Discord that are doing these games. And a lot of these guys have worked on, tons of huge games over the years. I can't rattle off the top of my head, but just basically they've been in AAA development for many years. And so we have a really crack team actually that's creating some cool stuff that, I can't wait to share, soon, hopefully. So
that's very exciting for everyone, in the space and for everyone who uses Discord. And yeah, I guess, on that note, as we start to wrap up, you've had such a diverse career. And like I said, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the Gamma Partner Program and dropping art with us. And, we can't wait to see, what else you do with us, but then also what you're up to at Discord. Is there anything that I guess didn't ask you, or anything else that you'd like to share before we finish?
No, I really appreciate what you're doing here in these spaces and interviewing. And, my next piece will be a kind of a sequel to a second part of the Aristocrats. And it's kind of geared towards the Bored Apes, not just Bored Apes, but apes in general have kind of taken over the NFT world. There was the Bored Apes, and then now there's every other kind of ape you can imagine that kind of people are taking off from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a great platform to get the exposure from.
Oh, thanks so much. And yeah, looking forward to that next piece. And you're right. Well, I guess we all, descended from apes, depending on your beliefs and whatnot. So it's no surprise that people like to be represented by apes for their profile pictures. So I think, I'm looking forward to that. Sounds very apt. So yeah, once again, thank you so much for spending the time with me and for the audience to learn that little bit more about you and just see what a decorated and unique career you've had. Thanks so much, Olly.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Brett. Appreciate it. Thanks.